John McMullen joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. NFL Network's Ann Rappaport reporting could move Nelson Agholor night. Now, this isn't like a huge surprise. This is something that we've all kind of hinted at, yourself included. But Agholor, do you think that this is that he could be moved on draft night, or would it be more of like the Jordan Matthews for Darby thing, something that happens in training camp?
Well, I think the hope would be to move him. I mean, if the Eagles are going to take Marquise Brown at 25, Nelson's not going to be back. So it's just a matter of when it happens. I don't think it would happen tomorrow night because he's obviously not going to generate a first-round pick, but you would certainly want to get it done at some time during the draft. If not, it could continue on, but it's very, very unlikely in that type of scenario that Nelson would be back. So, we've been talking about that for a long time. And I mentioned it on the show a number of times. Those whispers have persisted even after the Eagles agreed, essentially said they were bringing him back on a fifth-year option. Didn't work out an extension. Didn't make sense at the time. It's really questionable that they would want to pay him essentially $9.4 million. So that's fluid, to say the least.
Yeah, I know. Do you think that Roseman wants to add more picks in this draft and that he might give up a player like Agholor to assemble more picks?
Yeah, you always want more picks. The theory of the NFL is you want 10, and it's more imperative. You always want 10. It's more imperative for the Eagles because they've been understocked for a couple of years since the Carson Wentz trade. This is the first year. There's a semblance of normalcy, but they still don't have a ton of picks. And with that, we talked about a lot with the Carson Wentz extension around the corner, whether it happens before May 3rd or it happens next year. At some point, you have to kind of shift gears and start talking about more younger players on cost-effective contracts. And how do you get them? You get them with draft picks.
Yeah, I know. By the way, NFL Network's Ann Rappaport reporting that the one-player team view is being available from the Eagles, Nelson Agholor. He carries a 9.4 fully guaranteed price tag, potential to be traded if Philly drafts a receiver. So let's go down that road. If they draft a receiver, there's really only one, right, in the first round. But what if they draft a receiver in round 2 where they have 2 picks? Would that necessitate trying to move Agholor?
Well, the whole
do you think that getting a receiver with one of those two second round picks is feasible?
I don't know if there would be interest. I think there's interest in the Eagles in one particular player. And that's Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown from Oklahoma. The thought process that he could be sort of like a Tyreek Hill-like difference maker on an offense. I think that's putting a lot of expectations on him. I don't know necessarily if they just want a receiver. They just really, really like him. And then if you get him, look, there's only one football. And you also have Alshon Jeffrey. You brought back Deshaun Jackson if Nelson would be here. And you have the tight end, Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. So there's going to be some unhappiness if things unfurl that way. I don't think it's about a receiver. I think it's about a particular player, not necessarily that they want that particular position.
Right. So, in other words, they like Brown. If they can get him at 25, that's their guy. Maybe even move up to get him?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know if they take him at 25. I said when Peter King kind of put that in his mock draft, I predicted that you're going to see that train that he's going to pick up because he's been very close to Doug Peterson. Look, there's 2 ways you can look at it. And I said, if that's really what the Eagles are thinking, why would they leak that to Peter King? Because everybody knows Peter has got a direct line to Doug. So it could be subterfuge as well. And I always lean on how Howie Roseman builds this team. And he builds this team on the offensive and defensive line. And those are the strengths of this draft. So I don't think it's a fait accompli that the Eagles are taking Brown if he's there. I think the fait accompli is one of the players they like, but I don't think it's 100% if he's there. And I don't think that's a player they would move up for.
Doesn't that really change the dynamics of their whole thought process, like to go from a wide receiver to maybe an interior defensive lineman?
Well, it's
you follow what I'm saying? It's like
process.
If your thought process is we'd like to get a defensive lineman. Oh, this guy Brown's still here. Now it almost seems like you're ripping up the paper and really going off script.
Well, there's always exceptions to every rule. You know, we constantly talk about running back and how the team doesn't value running back and how they haven't taken a running back since 1985 or whatever it was with Keith Byers. So there are players that sort of overtake your DNA if you believe that much in them. And if the Eagles believe Marquise Brown's going to be Tyreek Hill, that's the kind of player.
Yeah.
You that overtakes your
John,
DNA.
It seems that, like, it's copycat league. We copy everything. Everyone's trying to find that small, fast, explosive receiver now. Like, that's find that guy.
Yeah, and the versatility as well. Because Deshaun is small, but he can't do a number of the things that somebody like Tyreek Hill could do with all the jet sweeps, and that's the kind of stuff Brown can do, or in theory could potentially do. So I think that's the thought process from the Eagles in that particular player. But it doesn't change what they are and what they believe in. And what they believe in is building from the foundations in the trenches on both sides. So I wouldn't rule that out. Let's put it that way. That's what they believe in, and that's the strengths of this draft.
John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter. We know the Eagles have pick number 25, and they have a propensity to be active on draft night. I was sweating bullets there. Not much last night because the Sixers opened up a can of whoop ass and never really closed the can. They just kept whipping them and whipping them. But if the Sixers would have lost last night, that game 6 would have been on Thursday night, and there's a potential that people would have been watching the Sixers game, and you know what would have happened then. Howie would have said, "You can't watch the Sixers game. I got to make a trade." Right?
Well, luckily, you only had to sweat about that for about 2 minutes.
Yeah, right?
And the game was over. Well, I don't know. I will say the Eagles like the back page of the paper, as they used to say. Nobody reads newspapers anymore, but
they're all reading websites like 97.3 ESPN.com.
Exactly. They do like to be in the forefront of everyone's mind, and they are. They usually are. So even in a run what the Sixers are having, and even with the Phillies being more relevant, although they're not playing that well, but they're relevant, it's still the Eagles' town. They're not concerned with that stuff.
No, but I found it funny that if the Sixers would have played that night, that's what I was like, Howie, he is going to have to get people to switch the television channel. And, hey, the Eagles just made a trade. What? Wait, what? Who'd they get? What are they doing? But, no, they got 25. Before we dive in, Chris Long, undecided about playing this year. Any gut feeling on he's scheduled to make 3.5, but that doesn't really matter because a lot of times he gives his salary to something anyway, a $2 million roster bonus in May.
Yeah, and they pushed it back. Remember, it was supposed to be before the draft. They pushed it back to after the draft. Everything with Chris Long is about his role. He wants to play, or he did want to play after the season, but he wants to be valued. He wants that role. He wants that third down pass rusher spot in this defense. And the Eagles can't guarantee it until after the draft, especially in this draft where we have so many edge rushers. So bottom line is if they get an edge rusher in those first 57 picks, doesn't even necessarily have to be in the first round, I don't think Chris is back here, certainly. He might want to play, and he might find another fit somewhere else. But I think the Eagles would allow him to leave. If they don't, I think he'll be back. And I think he.
So you think there's a chance he could play someplace else next year?
Well,
if he finds the right, obviously, if he finds the right.
Yeah, he's got to be in the right system. He won a Super Bowl in New England. Happy with that system. He's very happy in this system, which allows him to pin his ears back and rush the quarterback. That's what he wants. So it would have to be a specific fit, probably have to be with a contender. I don't know if he necessarily wants to do that. He did say his most recent comments were he doesn't necessarily want to do the off-season work at this stage of his career, and that is a bit of a sea change. It's never been about money. It's always been about role, but he's also getting to the point where it's a little bit of a surprise that as we're gearing up to start off-season work, that he wasn't really hyped up to be there. So that could lean towards him walking away as well.
Yeah, that's your first indication of, you know what, I don't know that I feel like doing this anymore.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's not playing the games. Everybody loves playing the games. It's getting ready to play the games. Okay. And at that age, it's very tough on your body. It's a grind. It really is. And guys get tired of what it takes to play at a high level. And by the way, he's played at a very high level since he's gotten here. But it takes a toll on you to be able to do that at his age.
All right, let's dive into a couple of other things here in terms of this draft. You know, the one thing, too, is with Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas. I want to ask you about that because you tweeted about this. Quick thoughts about Joe Douglas. But before we get, do you think that Douglas, this could be his last draft here? You tweeted this out. I think that there was no GM turnovers this past year, which I found to be like amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. It's astonishing, and it's not going to happen 2 years in a row. So I mean, I talked to Joe. If people remember, it was in August at one of the practices in Lincoln Financial Field where Jeffrey Lurie announced the extensions for Doug Peterson and Howie Roseman through 2022. Joe wasn't extended. There's a reason for that, and it's not because the Eagles don't like him. It's because he wants to be a GM, and he's not going to be a GM. And by GM, use whatever term you want. I'm using not the title, because Howie Roseman's title is Executive Vice President of Football Operations, but the traditional GM role of having the final say in personnel matters. Joe's not going to have that here. And that's his ultimate goal. So he wants to be able to take interviews if GM spots open, and I think they will next year. And, yeah, it could possibly be his last draft.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see how this draft goes because Zach Berman was on with Mason Aton earlier today, and he really said something that kind of stood out to me, which was that he feels that this draft could be a defining draft for the Eagles. And I kind of perked up when he said that, and I'm thinking, that's interesting because they are drafting deeper. They have a couple of picks, but now you're 2 years, you're going to that second year post-Super Bowl, and this is really that time where you got to really start replenishing because there are some older guys on this team that I don't know how many more years. Your Jason Peters, your Jason Kelsey's, Chris Long, right? Malcolm Jenkins, Nigel Bradham. I mean, there are some important guys on this team that you don't know how many more good years they're going to have left in them.
Well, even Brandon Graham, guys they've re-signed, and Vinny Curry and Deshaun Jackson as well. It is an older team. And, yeah, they have 3 picks in the top 50.
Happens fast, man, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, again, we've talked about they haven't had as many picks as they normally do because of what they had to give up to get Carson Wentz. And this is the first year it's getting back to normalcy. And the fact that you have 3 in the top 57, you'd like to come out with 3 contributors, but certainly you want to come out with at least 2, and by that I mean significant contributors. So that's what I think. I didn't hear what Zach said, but that's what I assume he was referring to. They need to hit on some of these picks because they need more cost-effective contracts with that Wentz contract coming.
He said there should be more buzz here. This has a chance to really be one of the defining drafts for the Eagles in recent years. When you look at the fact that they have 3 of the top 57, as far as what they're going to do, it really depends on when the run on quarterback comes in. So he was saying that there should be more buzz about this draft because he felt that it was a really important draft and people aren't as into the draft because you're picking 25.
Well, yeah, I mean, the lesser you pick, obviously, if you have a top 5 pick, people get more excited, even top 10. So that's part of it. Part of it is that the Sixers are making a playoff run right now and set to begin a really big series against Toronto. That's part of it. And then it is, you're not necessarily talking about, at least in the lead up to the draft, we've talked a lot about offensive and defensive line. And those aren't as sexy as quarterback or even wide receiver. So maybe a Marquise Brown does get people a little bit more juiced up because it's a skill position player. So I think a lot of that sort of factors into it. But there's no question all drafts are big, but this one is really big for the Eagles.
Couple draft notes let's dive into. Mike Garafolo reporting that the Redskins have explored trading into the top 5. Does that signal quarterback?
Yes. It's funny. I talk about it all the time. The quarterbacks get pushed up the board.
But Daniel Snyder's running the draft first round, isn't he?
Yeah, there's a report coming out of Washington that Daniel Snyder's taking control, so that should excite Eagles fans. But and then I've heard they wanted Dwayne Haskins, who's local from Jersey, Maryland, high school ball. That report says they want Daniel Jones. I think there's a little tweaking at the Giants, who also want Daniel Jones. And the thought process with the Giants is they take the edge rusher at 6 and wait for Jones at 17. I don't know if Jones is going to get to 17. And that's kind of what you have to do with quarterbacks. I talked about it with Patrick Mahomes yesterday. If you believe in a guy, you can't wait. You can't go down. You got to go up and get him. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be 4 quarterbacks that go in the first round. And I would not be surprised if they're all off the board by, say, 15.
Boy, what a residency the NFC East would be if that situation. You got the Giants and the Redskins, 2 teams that really, if they both go quarterback, the Giants, if they go quarterback, you essentially have your first-round pick sitting on the bench, right?
Well, no, I don't think that would last long. I mean, once you take a quarterback, and you're a bad football team, and I say this all the time as well. There's such pressure to get you on the young guy on the field because if you're going to be 6-10 or 5-11 with Eli Manning, well, why not start the future now? So the minute they take the guy in the first round, the clock starts ticking on Eli Manning. For the Giants, though, and the Redskins, and everybody else who's looking for a quarterback, Miami, perhaps Cincinnati, obviously Arizona. Arizona doesn't want him, but everybody else, I'd rather have Josh Rosen. And you probably only got to give up a second-round pick to get him.
Well, hold on a second. Arizona says that he's a top 10 pick for a reason. Maybe they don't want to trade Josh Rosen.
Well, yeah, obviously that's sort of their last-minute bluff to try to increase the price of what they're going to get back. And they've even floated one report that says they want Williams, the defensive tackle from Alabama, and they're not going to take him. And so this is the kind of stuff you have in the last 24 hours to the draft. You got everybody throwing out all kinds of disinformation, misinformation, and it's all to try to get other teams to do something so you can get your particular player. Ultimately, I would be stunned if Arizona doesn't take Kyler Murray. If they don't, I mean, Worst case scenario, somebody might trade up for him. If not, I mean, Oakland's going to take him. John Gruden has no interest in moving forward with Derek Carr long term, so he's not going to fall far. And as I said, the other guys are just shooting up the board, and that means that's all good news for the Eagles, because that means the best players in this draft, because quarterbacks aren't the best players in this draft.
Mm-mm.
Best players are positional players, and that means they get pushed farther down the board.
Okay, we've got plenty more tomorrow. We will go over the lock-it-in mock draft and see how that plays out tomorrow night. The NFL draft right here on 97.3 ESPN. The coverage begins at 8 p.m., and we will be live at the Wonder Bar, Atlantic City, with a great crowd, great prizes, great opportunity. We've got Eagles-Patriots tickets. We've got an Eagles road trip. We've got 4-packs to the AC Blackjacks home opener. So stop out tomorrow, Wonder Bar, Atlantic City, and find out who the Eagles will pick. John McMullen, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, man.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Draft day finally here. Tomorrow, you can hear it all live on 97.3 ESPN. Right after the Tony Bruno Draft War Room. He'll be following the Blackjacks Weekly Coaches Show from 6 to 6:30, followed by the Bruno War Room with Mays and Atop.